Nowadays, American Horror Story is known as a long-spanning horror anthology show that has a knack for casting headline-inducing stars and pushing the boundaries of horror on television. But today, I want to take you back to the very beginning, the first season of AHS, long before it became the franchise we know, some of us love, and some of us love to hate. But if you're new here, my name is Skyler Gaetano, and lately I've been making a lot of videos like this one, diving deep into some of my favorite TV shows, and soon I will be covering some films as well. I like to take you guys through the history of a project from its production, and then take you through the plot while injecting a lot of fun facts and or bonus content that may be overlooked by some casual fans, and of course my opinion whether you like it or not. So if that type of content is up your alley, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and now let's travel back in time to the very first time the words American Horror Story were publicly strung together, February 17th, 2011. It was on that day that FX announced it would be ordering a pilot for an hour-long drama titled American Horror Story from two producers who were hot off the success of the first two seasons of a little show called Glee. Of course, those guys are Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk, who, long before Glee, already had a relationship with the network FX. Murphy created Nip Tuck, a successful and boundary-pushing medical drama in its own right that ran for 6 seasons. It was during that time that Murphy began a close creative relationship with Falchuk, who started working on Nip Tuck as a writer, but by its final season, he had worked his way up to executive producer. In the midst of the show's success, Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk actually wrote and shot another pilot in 2008 for a similarly stylized show entitled Pretty Handsome, which saw Joseph Fiennes playing a transgender woman faced with the challenge of coming out to her family. But after that pilot was completed, FX decided not to pick it up to series, and a 2018 article with Vogue had Murphy pointing to FX being concerned that its advertisers would not support the subject matter. In hindsight, Pretty Handsome was clearly ahead of its time. However, based on the negative reactions I've read to some of the trans storylines that made their way onto Glee shortly afterwards, it might be for the best that the Ryan Murphy of 2008 wasn't given a full series to explore transgender issues. Murphy would continue to attempt to get transgender stories on TV, and he was eventually quite successful with Pose, which he launched alongside Falchuk and producer Stephen Canals exactly 10 years later in 2018, thanks to including a lot of transgender creatives in terms of writing, directing, and acting. I love Pose Season 1 and Season 2. But the network's decision to not move forward with Pretty Handsome in 2008 at least partly contributed to the inception of Murphy and Falchuk's next huge hit, Glee, which they co-created alongside Ian Brennan, who approached the duo with the initial idea. And if you watch the Pretty Handsome pilot, it's clear some of those storylines were also the guinea pigs for some familiar Glee storylines as well. Essentially, around this time, Murphy and Falchuk went from controversial and boundary-pushing shows over on a premium cable network to a relatively more wholesome teen drama aimed towards a family audience, after FX told them they might have pushed the boundaries a bit too far. So, during Glee's height, it was a pretty unexpected move to attempt to launch a sleazy horror show, but to the producers themselves, it probably seemed natural to go back to their roots of pushing boundaries with FX now that their careers had a lot more of a safety net with Glee's massive success. In other words, through the failure of Pretty Handsome, they shifted gears and struck gold with Glee, which then allowed them to take a risk by producing the pilot of American Horror Story. It's also worth noting that a completely separate show, The Walking Dead, had recently started to change the landscape of horror on television with its then recent first season, which the success of certainly helped FX make the call to go all in on AHS. And go all in they did, because on July 18th, 2011, it was announced that American Horror Story was picked up for 13 episodes set to go into production on the 28th, forcing a tight and complex shooting schedule in correspondence with Glee Season 3. As production began and writing continued, some integral AHS voices were publicly added to the mix, like writers Tim Minear, Jennifer Salt, James Wong, and Jessica Sharzer, and of course, a star-studded cast began to take shape as well, with the first ever American Horror Story cast member to be announced being Connie Britton, hot off of the heels of Friday Night Lights. But I'll dive deeper into the season's cast as we start breaking down the episodes themselves, and before we do that, I want to emphasize a crucial detail about AHS Season 1. It was not promoted as an anthology series in any way, shape, or form, and its subtitle of Murder House actually comes from the dialogue of the show itself, and no official teasers, DVD releases, or posters actually called this season Murder House. So definitely keep that fact in mind as we go through this season, because I think the season's stakes and pacing were really unlike any TV dramas at the time, and that's because unlike most TV pilots and first seasons, Murphy and Falchuk never planned on continuing the story of the Harmons beyond one season. It was always the goal for the show to reinvent itself should it be renewed. Speaking of those guys, I want to also mention what they've cited as some of the major creative inspirations for this season. Most obviously, this season started the show's reliance on homages to the 1968 film based on the novel by the same name, Rosemary's Baby. We all know the gist of that. A pregnant woman moves into an apartment where exceedingly strange and devilish things begin to occur involving her pregnancy and some intrusive neighbors. Then there's Stanley Kubrick's iconic 1980 adaptation of the Stephen King novel, The Shining, which of course revolves around a writer and his family traveling to a nearly empty hotel during its off-season, where they encounter the supernatural in a film with a masterful use of unreliable narrators. Next up on their mood board was the 1979 film The Amityville Horror, a classic story about a family moving into a haunted house where the previous owner killed his entire family. The film was based on a true crime event, which also could have given them some subtle inspiration to rely on some true crime stories for several plot lines in the many seasons of the show. Lastly, AHS's creators cite the 1973 film Don't Look Now as an inspiration for this season as well, a supernatural thriller that explores clairvoyance and a couple's grief after the death of their young child. Another influence on this season that I haven't seen the creators mention throughout my research yet, but I feel like is all over this season, has got to be M. Night Shyamalan's 1999 film The Sixth Sense, which is about a child psychologist who starts the film being attacked by a patient who then kills himself in front of him, after which that psychologist starts to see a new patient claiming to be psychic. Those of you who know this season can already see some parallels between these films and American Horror Story. But before we jump into the plot, for one, I might spoil those movies for you by acknowledging the show's references to them, but I also want to reiterate the content warning that you saw at the start of the video. This video will deal with more serious topics than I've dealt with in previous videos, things that I know can be extremely triggering to certain people, so please listen to yourselves, your mind, and your bodies, and if this video ever makes you feel uncomfortable, turn it off. I will not be offended. With that said, I'll try to keep things as fun as possible as we venture through part 1 of this season. So now let's pull back the curtain on the pilot episode of AHS. Series co-creators Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk masterfully crafted this pilot episode of American Horror Story, spinning a sinister and twisted web of terrors that lean on familiar tropes of haunted house horror films, while still simultaneously serving as a boundary-pushing blueprint for the series' signature tone, visuals, and performance styles. The first ever title card featuring that iconic Charles Rennie Macintosh typeface places us in 1978 when the eponymous murder house was at its most decrepit, landscaping overgrown and windows boarded up. Naturally, this place attracts mischievous children.
Hey, freak.
These redheaded twins are bullying a young Adelaide Langdon, played just in this scene by actress Caitlin Reed. Young Adelaide delivers the first of many iconic lines from this show.
You are going to die in there.
I must say, I'm surprised none of the twins' lines made such a lasting impression.
We got bats. I hate trees!
The twins, named Troy and Brian, then enter the mansion, and we begin to get familiar with the show's quick cuts and hyper-fluid camera movements as the boys put their bats to the test, destroying any and everything made of glass. Speaking of those cuts, fun fact, this episode was one of a handful of episodes that was actually edited by longtime AHS producer and director Bradley Becker. The twins find a possum with a wound on its neck, but it's still breathing, meaning whatever did that to it is nearby. Venturing down into the basement, they discover several jars of body parts, some from animals and some from humans. Spooked, the twins abort their mischief, but Troy gets separated from Brian before they can make it out of the basement together, and Brian soon finds his brother sliced and diced worse than the possum. As Brian too screams at the unseen beast in the basement, the show cuts to black and places us in the present day, which at the time was around 2011. We meet Vivian Harmon as she is discussing getting back on her birth control with her doctor, who suggests a hormone treatment instead. Vivian Harmon is played by Connie Britton, who has an illustrious career in film and television, but surprisingly, Murder House was the only full season of American Horror Story that she starred in. But like many of her co-stars, she does reprise this character in the 2018 follow-up season and crossover with Coven entitled Apocalypse. But aside from that one extra episode as Vivian, Connie's talents only grace our screens to deliver our first AHS main protagonist. She hasn't exactly shied away from Ryan Murphy though, appearing in the first season of American Crime Story, as well as playing a central role as a dispatcher in the first season of 911. One thing about Connie Britton is she knows how to sign a contract for one season and one season only. Vivian then arrives home in snowy Boston, Massachusetts, where, unlike Connie's character 911, she finds herself on the other end of the line with 911 after she hears someone in her home.
911.
I have an intruder in my house.
Are you sure it's not a member of your family?
No, nobody's home.
What's the address?
Not wasting any time waiting around for the cops, Vivian heads upstairs with her biggest knife, where she finds not an intruder, but her husband Ben in bed with another woman. Ben Harmon is played by Dylan McDermott, who has had 3 different roles in the AHS universe. Vivian descends the hallway in disbelief as Ben chases after her, and when he grabs her, she swings her blade at his arm. Off of that chaos, the pilot episode cuts to the title sequence for the first time ever. Viewers back on October 5th, 2011 perhaps had no clue how many different iterations of this theme song and title sequence would be created throughout the 12 seasons of AHS and the 3 seasons of its episodic spin-off, but one thing's for certain, it creeped people the hell out from day one. The music is jarring and unnerving, composed by Cesar de Villa Irizarry, Charlie Clouser, who composes for the Saw franchise, and the series' primary score composer, Mac Quayle. As for the visuals, they would genuinely give a child, and probably a lot of adults, nightmares, and they were produced by Kyle Cooper and Prologue Studios. But I don't want to harp too much on this iconic title sequence since I have a whole video breaking down it and the 11 other title sequences of the main series coming soon, and this video is long enough. So definitely make sure you guys are subscribed so you don't miss that. And once we are back from the title sequence, the Harmons have now arrived in their new city, Los Angeles, California. Vivian and Ben's daughter is named Violet Harmon, played by Thaisa Farmiga, in her first major role, the first of many actors whose AHS roles helped catapult their careers to new heights. Aside from her 2 major AHS roles, Thaisa has remained booked and busy in film and TV, perhaps most notably starring in the box office horror hits that were The Nun and The Nun 2. And I could never forget the 4th member of the Harmon family, Hallie, their Chihuahua Poodle mix, or Chipu, I believe. Hallie is played by a dog named Lamb Chop in real life, and yes, I'm being so serious right now. She has showed up in a ton of other projects, according to her bio on gooddoganimals.com, including a reunion with Ryan Murphy Productions when she played a dog trapped in a hot car during a season 1 episode of 911. The family's vibe is exactly what you would expect. Vivian and Ben are not on great terms after he cheated, and Violet's the already angsty teen whose life is being upended by her parents. This underlying tension is played off for the most part as the family shares some fake laughs as they head towards their new home, which, surprise surprise, is that same creepy mansion from the opening scene, only now it's cleaned up, renovated, and despite still giving haunted house vibes, it's absolutely stunning. The choice to film at the Rosenheim mansion for the pilot episode and exterior shots throughout the rest of the season was brilliant. Casting the house for this show was just as important as casting any of its characters, and with the amount of times the show has revisited this building itself, 5 times to be exact, you could definitely argue it was the most important casting choice of this season, and maybe even the show. I will delve deeper into the history of the real Rosenheim mansion itself later on in the video, but as you can see from some examples on your screen right now, since the season aired, this house has become an inseparable icon representing American Horror Story itself. The Harmon's realtor, Marcy, is played by Christine Estabrook, who you've definitely seen in some of her several film and television roles, and before Murder House, she previously starred in an episode of Ryan Murphy's earlier FX drama, Nip Tuck, and later she too popped up in a couple episodes of 911. That's now a majority of the actors in this scene that later appeared on 911, if you are keeping track. Ben mentions that Vivian used to be a cellist, but that's a hobby she's recently given up, but conversation quickly turns to some bad news Marcy has to tell the Harmons about the house's previous owners.
They didn't die in here or anything, did they? Yes, actually, both of them.
Violet calms Hallie down after she incessantly barks at the basement door, likely a reference to the dog in Amityville Horror, who was also wary of the basement. Violet asks Marcy more details about the previous owner's death. Marcy says that it was a murder-suicide and it happened in the basement.
We'll take it.
They do take it, in large part thanks to its largely discounted price, and soon enough, the Harmons try their best to settle in. At her new school, Violet cosplays Freddy Krueger while smoking a cig through the courtyard, which angers a gaggle of mean girls.
Leah's grandmother died of lung cancer. She takes this stuff pretty seriously.
This girl named Leah tries to force Violet to eat her lit cigarette, so Violet spits in her face. At home, Vivian begins to peel off layers of wallpaper in one of the rooms, and she starts to reveal a very haunting mural before she's jump scared by adult Adelaide, still giving that same ominous warning.
You're gonna die in here.
Adelaide from this point on is played by actress Jamie Brewer in her debut performance actually, and after this season she went on to appear in Coven, Freak Show, Cult, Apocalypse, as well as the spin-off American Horror Stories, where she briefly reprised the role of Adelaide. Sort of, but that's a story for another day. Behind Adelaide enters her mother, Constance, a large force to be reckoned with, played by the incomparable Jessica Lange. By 2011, Jessica Lange had won several awards, including 2 Oscars, but by the time Ryan Murphy approached her for this new and upcoming horror show, Lange was itching for something new.
I was up at my farm upstate New York and the phone rang. I just loved his energy and his enthusiasm right from the beginning. It didn't take much to talk me into it. He spun this story of the first season of American Horror Story, and I thought, I'm sitting up here at the farm, you know, why not do it? Why not do it? I always wanted to do like a psychological thriller. It didn't end up exactly of that genre, but that's what he originally promised me, so.
Murphy and Lange ended up being a fruitful partnership for both parties, creating award-winning performances in several different projects, and I cannot think of anyone better to play Constance Langdon, or Sister Jude, or Fiona Good, or Elsa Mars. The Langdons are the Harmons' new neighbors, and Constance kicks off the season by being racist towards Dora the Explorer and sending Adelaide back home.
That girl is a monster.
Constance warns Vivian that Adelaide, or Addie for short, has a tendency of finding her way inside this house, whether the current owners like it or not. Herself overstaying her welcome, Constance says she came to California in hopes to be a movie star, but that dream faded once she realized how vulgar the industry had become. On her way out, Constance gives Vivian some sage and asks her name for the first time.
My name is Vivian Harmon.
Anyway.
Later, while saging the house, Vivian checks out the attic for seemingly the first time, where she discovers an elaborate rubber BDSM suit. Ben tosses the suit in the trash, and we immediately cut to the next scene where Ben, a psychologist by profession, is treating a patient named Tate in his new home office. This is, of course, perhaps the most infamous character of all American Horror Story creations, Tate Langdon, played by Evan Peters. But these characters won't know that he's a Langdon for about half of the season. Despite only being 24 at the time of AHS, Peters had been working for quite some time before, but his roles on this show have undoubtedly helped skyrocket his career. Tate tells Ben his recurring fantasy of going to his high school in full skeleton makeup and killing multiple people. Tate then goes on a tangent about ancient civilizations who would participate in blood sacrifices once a month.
Very smart, I like that.
Tate also says his dad left after he caught his mom cheating on him, and he says,
The world is a filthy place. It's a filthy goddamn horror show.
Elsewhere in the Harmons' haunted household, Violet cuts herself over the sink, but she's interrupted by Tate, who gives her some pointers on her technique. That night, Ben sleepwalks downstairs where he lights the fireplace before being brought back to bed by Vivian. This whole sequence of events is very likely a reference to the Amityville Horror as well. The next day, Vivian is approached on the front lawn by a woman named Moira O'Hara, who says she's been the longtime housekeeper here. Moira is played by Frances Conroy in her first of several iconic AHS roles, but before AHS, Conroy built a name for herself with several acclaimed roles in both film and television, including an episode of Ryan Murphy's Nip Tuck. Vivian is reluctant to accept her as their housekeeper, but Moira makes it clear that she's in over her head taking care of a large house with such specific needs.
Have you ever owned a house this old before?
No.
It has a personality, feelings. Mistreat it and you'll regret it.
Inside Moira goes, and naturally the ladies discuss some tea over tea as Moira gets into the gory details of the previous owner's murder-suicide.
I cleaned the mess. You'd never know.
Ben walks into the kitchen, and as Vivian introduces Moira, we switch to Ben's perspective, and funnily enough, Moira does not appear to Ben as the soft-spoken older woman that Vivian was talking to. Instead, this Moira is younger, more flirtatious. Young Moira is played by Alexandra Breckenridge in her first of 2 AHS roles, but you may also know her from her roles on The Walking Dead, This Is Us, or Virgin River. Ben is confused that Vivian is on board with hiring Moira, but he doesn't object. In another session with Tate, Ben tries to scope out if Tate's visions of a school shooting pose a tangible threat or not, while also busting him for not taking his antidepressants. Tate says he didn't take them because he just met a girl. Cut to Tate and Violet bonding over self-harm scars, as well as hating California teens and having cheating parents, before he gets kicked out by Ben.
Stay away from him.
After walking in on Moira pleasuring herself, Ben goes into another room and does the same for himself before breaking down into tears. In the kitchen, Vivian is spooked by some classic ghost shit as she enters a perfectly normal kitchen that suddenly has every cabinet opened when she turns her head.
Why are you in my house?
This moment feels strikingly similar to a scene in The Sixth Sense, which itself might have been referencing Poltergeist. Vivian calls Constance over to insist she stop breaking in and messing with her, so Constance tells Adelaide to apologize. But Addie says it wasn't her.
Who did it?
The twins.
Vivian goes a bit ham on Addie, and on her way out, Addie gets bitten by Hallie, the dog.
She shouldn't have done that.
And once Addie's left, Constance says,
"You touch my kid one more time and I will break your goddamn arm."
Later, Violet gets into a fist fight with Leah, one of the girls from earlier. Back at home, Vivian brushes off Ben's affection again, which sends him into a rage.
I screwed up! How many times do I have to say it? I'm sorry!
The details of Ben's affair are now fully clear. After Vivian suffered a very traumatic miscarriage, Ben was sleeping with a 21-year-old student of his in their bed. Ben is absolutely irrational in this scene, honestly, and there's not any point in this season that I feel bad for him.
I needed you, and you got a dog.
He then professes his undying love for Vivian while simultaneously equating his affair to Vivian adopting a dog. Connie Britton nails this scene from her rage, her sarcasm, her playing that switch from being emotionally manipulated to snapping out of it. Unlike McDermott's melodramatic screaming, Britton's emotions feel tangible, and her subtlety really goes a long way in a season that's full of capital C camp. Vivian begins to push Ben away from her until their physical contact turns into passionate kissing that then evolves into their first sexual interaction since the affair. Later, Violet vents about the mean girls to Tate, so he proposes that they scare Leah, and that will get her off of Violet's ass.
How am I gonna terrify her?
Helter-skelter.
That's where I come in.
That night, in her bedroom, Vivian is paid a visit by who we at first presume is Ben wearing the rubber suit. But the show quickly clues us in on what's truly going on as we cut to Ben downstairs in the kitchen, where he once again appears to be sleepwalking and igniting shit. This means whoever is upstairs in that suit is not him. And that brings us to a truly difficult scene to discuss, which I won't be showing visuals from, but essentially the wearer of the rubber suit engages in intercourse with Vivian without ever removing his suit or mask, all the while Vivian believes she's with Ben. Sexual assault is something that often gets mentioned alongside criticism against AHS, and for the most part I've shied away from discussing it too much in my deep dives, but the first season, Murder House, certainly set a precedent for the earlier seasons, especially to opt for shock value, and naturally that does alienate some viewers. This particular scene is not explicitly graphic, but it is extremely disturbing to watch within the context. But according to my own subjective perspective, I would say that this particular scene is handled well. I would caution people who are triggered by scenes of sexual assault to stay far away from this season and perhaps this show as a whole, but the scene isn't glorifying or glamorizing assault here. The scene is intended to be terrifying, and it is indeed a chilling scene to the core. But I'll elaborate some more on my thoughts on the show's history of using sexual assault in its storylines in the review section. Then, putting Tate's plan to action, Violet guides the mean girl Leah down to the basement, where Tate sits in a very infamous t-shirt. The lights begin to flash, and Tate does some good demonic impersonations, but things quickly get terrifying as we see flashes of the monster from the opening scene of this episode. He is known as the Infantata, and he is played by the late Ben Wolfe in his first of 2 AHS roles. The Infantata slashes Leah's face, and when Violet turns on the lights, Tate's sitting in the chair and the Infantata is gone. Leah flees and Violet's freaked out, so she kicks Tate out.
I thought you weren't afraid of anything!
If you thought you've had enough of these men screaming melodramatically, well, we're only just scratching the surface. While on a jog, Ben notices he's being followed by a man who, once he catches up to Ben, we see has scars on his face as well as a fedora, probably another Freddy Krueger homage. So, who is this guy and what's his deal?
I'm Larry Harvey, and you have to get out of that house.
Oh. Larry is played by Dennis O'Hare in his first of several AHS roles, 2 of which we've already talked about in my Roanoke deep dive and my Red Tide deep dive. Larry tells Ben he's out of prison thanks to his terminal cancer diagnosis, but the reason why he was locked up and why he has those scars are actually one and the same. He murdered his wife and 2 kids by lighting them on fire after dousing their rooms in gasoline inside the murder house itself. Much like one of the show's inspiration points, the Amityville Horror, Larry says he was told by the voices in his head to do what he did, and he was not truly in control. Larry says the house is evil, and the Harmons best get the hell out as soon as possible. But Ben's not having any of it, and he demands Larry to stay away from him and his family. In Vivian's bedroom, Constance tries on her jewelry before being confronted by Moira, and it's clear there's a long-standing beef between these 2 women from their first on-screen interactions.
I'd be nervous if I were you too. When things go missing, they always blame the new maid. Don't make me kill you again.
That evening, Vivian gets home from a doctor's appointment, and she informs Ben that she is pregnant. They embrace as we cut to the credits on the pilot episode, but this episode has some cool, quick shots interspersed within the credits, which only occur in this episode, and you might notice that some of those shots are from deleted scenes from the episode. The pilot episode of AHS is honestly astonishing in how it manages to encapsulate nearly everything amazing about the show, as well as why it is so controversial. But first, let's start with the great things about this episode, starting with the visuals. Despite a lot of the style of the show's cinematography coming from Michael Goy, the pilot episode was actually shot by Christopher Baffa, who also shot most of Nip Tuck. The show's fluid camera movements and canted angles can also be found all over Nip Tuck, so you can definitely attribute a good amount of AHS's visual DNA to Christopher Baffa alongside Michael Goy, who took over after the first episode until the end of season 5. Those visuals, in combination with the quick cuts that characterize this episode and the season as a whole, makes the viewer themselves feel just as haunted as the characters themselves. And it won't work for everyone, but I am a fan. Speaking of being haunted, I also think that the episode introduces a lot of really interesting ghost characters that feel both original and complex. Most notably in this episode, the dual appearances of Moira and the mysterious Infantata. Other than the dead, our living characters rely on some familiar tropes of the haunted house variety, but that does make it a bit easier to jump right into their drama and their situation. I think Vivian Harmon is one of the series' strongest protagonists ever, in large part thanks to Connie Britton's portrayal of her as a woman who is just fed up with her asshole husband, now forced into taking control of her life under some seriously extreme circumstances. The episode also introduces one of the series' strongest antagonists ever, Constance Langdon. We will learn so much more about her throughout this season, as she is one of the most complex and intoxicating characters that this show has to offer. Of course, Jessica Lange delivers each line and monologue like her life depends on it, and as you'll see, the character flexes nearly every acting muscle that she has. The 2 main male characters in this season, Ben and Tate, are both extremely melodramatic, and I think this is intentional, as both are our most unreliable narrators in this season, and they are both characters who are clearly hiding stuff from us. This melodrama does often stand out compared to the more grounded and decisive female characters, and honestly, most of the time Ben or Tate raise their voices, it elicits a laugh from me, whether intentional or not, but this type of campy and emotional performance too is something that appears in nearly every season of AHS, usually through the mini screams of Sarah Paulson. It also cannot be understated just how influential this pilot episode was to the emo teen culture at the time, but that is a stone we will turn over later. But now I do want to touch on some of the more controversial aspects of this episode that definitely have echoes on the series as a whole, particularly how the episode handles self-harm and sexual assault. So again, please, if either of those topics are triggering to you, please click away. I will not be censoring my language, so please proceed with caution. I truly don't want anyone to be triggered. I just want to discuss an often under-discussed on YouTube aspect of this show. And if the video gets demonetized, I'll let you know in the comments below so you can send me a couple dollars on Patreon for the sacrifice of having this conversation. Firstly, regarding self-harm, there are multiple explicit scenes of Violet cutting herself throughout this season. And the first way that Tate connects with Violet is through encouraging her self-harm, dark joke or not. Of course, adults may look at these scenes differently than impressionable kids or teenagers and not see the show as romanticizing self-harm or encouraging it, as contextually these are clearly two deeply depressed kids without much support for their mental health. That said, actually seeing the self-harm action on screen feels unnecessary to me, but this is a creative choice that FX permitted to air under the TVMA rating, which indicates the content may not be suitable for audiences under 17 years old. But the fact is that this show reached a lot of teens and children, and especially seeing how many teens did heavily romanticize the relationship between Violet and Tate, it's easy to see why this scene started a much smaller version of a very similar conversation sparked by the 2017 Netflix show 13 Reasons Why, which of course dealt with similar themes of teen self-harm. It's easy to just say parents need to safeguard what they want their children to be watching, but at some point, especially today, kids will seek things out on their own because someone at school or on the internet mentioned it. So what I think is even more important than safeguarding and monitoring everything your kid consumes is making sure you are able to communicate with your kids honestly and are able to properly unpack heavy things that they may come across in an honestly dark world. Kids today, I fear, are exposed to much, much worse than the pilot episode of American Horror Story. So I honestly think making sure children who are exposed to things that may give them bad thoughts, they're able to express those thoughts and communicate those thoughts and get support from loved ones or professionals. And I know that is way easier said than done, but goddamn it, we really gotta talk to the kids and listen to them and their problems. But that is besides the point. I do find the self-harm scenes in this episode to be gratuitous, but I wouldn't opt to have them removed from the show. In general, I do not think that art should be modified to appease a common audience, but I also don't think that makes that art above criticism for how it handles heavy issues or sensitive issues. Now moving on to the theme of sexual assault in this episode, it contains a scene where Vivian is raped by whomever is in the rubber suit. It is left ambiguous in this episode, but it will get answered later on. As I mentioned in the recap, the scene treats the situation as horrific as it truly is, and I personally do not find this scene to be gratuitous in the same way that the self-harm scenes are. It's 100% subjective, but to me the show takes a stylized approach with its close-ups and editing that is more tasteful than other scenes of sexual assault in this season and also in other seasons of the show, most notably Coven and Hotel. In terms of significance to the story, this is a major inciting incident for the season, and I think if you compared it to some of the other instances of the show's storylines involving rape, a lot of those other ones do lean more towards serving more of a purpose of shock rather than story. But what I'm trying to say is this scene in particular does feel like an outlier. As for people who are triggered specifically by this type of stuff, I mean, I'm sure you're not at this point in the video, but if you are, or if you know someone who is, unfortunately, I think my advice is you do have to be hyper vigilant about what you personally are consuming and checking what content you're about to watch or read or whatever it may be. There are websites like doesthedogdie.com, that's the one I've used a few times, that lists potential triggers for most films and TV shows, but I'll be real with you, I've personally gone to therapy to get over personal triggers that I've had, and it is truly hard to be checking 100% of the things you are watching, especially if you're seeing a brand new movie or hanging out with friends or something like that. So I definitely do see both sides. However, I am pro-informing oneself and anti-censorship, but I want to continue to evaluate how the show handles the topic through these deep dives, because it does escalate from here and results in some scenes later on in the show's history that I would say are definitely gratuitous. But at least for now, the show is focusing on the unnerving reality that neither Vivian nor Ben know that such a violation has occurred. Before we move on to episode 2, 2, I would like to give you a brief history lesson on the location that helped produce this series-spawning season of television. I recently had an impromptu trip to Los Angeles for less than a day, and I happened to be within 15 minutes of the murder house itself. So I thought I might as well pay this iconic piece of AHS history a visit while I was in the area. So let's take a look at some of my footage from my very fast visit so as not to piss off the residents or any of their neighbors. And while we look at that footage, I will give you some of this stunning mansion's vast history. Originally built in 1908 by architect Alfred Rosenheim, the building consists of 6 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, 6 fireplaces, alongside its signature stained glass windows throughout the entire structure. The house was once inhabited by actor Edward Everett Horton in the 30s, and after he left it, it was a convent from the 1930s until around 1994. In 1994, there was a big earthquake that caused the nuns to sell the mansion rather than to repair it, and its ownership history since then is a little fishy, but around 2015, the mansion was bought by a married couple for $3.2 million. It had also been in the market in previous years for as high as $17 million, but this couple bought it in 2015 for around $3.2 million, and this couple later sued the previous owners and the realtors in February of 2018 for not disclosing the fact that many American Horror Story fans regularly visit the house, and some had even broken into the house on numerous occasions.
What do you see on a daily basis?
Just groups of people turning up in cars, taking selfies, taking videos.
Do you recognize the house, Stephen, John? American Horror Story.
We had several break-ins. We had on 3-4 occasions just in the last year I had to call the police.
The owners say fans have climbed fences and one perched on their ledge. Some teenagers literally got a lift from a garbage truck driver.
He put them in the crane and he elevated it, and I'm in my bathroom and I look out my bathroom window and there's like teenage girls screaming in at me.
And nobody told you at all. This has been an American Horror Story.
We Googled the house, of course, like everybody else would do. And if you Google the house, you find a lot of movies have been filmed here. Lastly, the American Horror Story, which I have never seen, you had never seen.
As far as I can tell, the people from the lawsuit still own the property. I mean, how could you give something like this up if you had the means to upkeep it? Although around 2016, it was briefly listed on Airbnb, and around 2020, the owners ended up embracing the house's notoriety a bit when they hosted a 3-day live stream from inside the Rosenheim mansion. In an article with We Like LA, one of the owners was quoted as saying, "I thought if we could do an event and show them the inside of the house, which is what they want, then maybe there'd be some sort of peace. So people can come in remotely and then we can donate a portion of the proceeds to charity." The livestream apparently consisted of ghost hunts, seances, and lots of talks and demonstrations from spiritual and or supernatural specialists, and a portion of the proceeds were reportedly donated to a local charity helping children in poverty. So hey, I hope the owners are having a better experience with the house than they did around the lawsuit, which I must reiterate was reportedly filed in February of 2018, and it's unclear whatever came of it, but obviously the owners have since allowed the AHS team to return to the mansion to film scenes for Apocalypse that very summer in 2018, as well as again returning in 2021 for the Murder House-centric spin-off episodes. Aside from being famous for its many appearances in the American Horror Story franchise, the Rosenheim Mansion has a reputation for being a popular filming location in general, although I would argue that its history as a filming location is very poorly documented. Most notably, the house does appear in a Season 4 episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer entitled Fear Itself, but a ton of articles claim that the mansion has also been featured in a long list of other projects, but they all seem to source back to a property listing from 2012, and I cannot find evidence of most of them, although I have definitely not watched all of these shows from top to bottom, because these are shows like Twilight Zone, Law & Order, that have hundreds and hundreds of episodes, episodes, so I cannot be 100% sure, so let me know if you can prove any of these claimed projects to be true outside of Buffy and American Horror Story. It would be really cool, though, if the history of this house could be also tied to such impactful shows, especially of the horror genre, like Twilight Zone, Dexter, The X-Files, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, but alas, I can't prove that any of these are a fact aside from Buffy. Back to its use in American Horror Story, though, it's pretty well known at this point that only the pilot episode of AHS filmed inside the actual Rosenheim mansion, and for the rest of the Murder House season, near identical replicas of the house's interiors were recreated on a soundstage. For exteriors, though, the team would return to the Rosenheim mansion several times throughout the production of this season. The second episode of American Horror Story, entitled Home Invasion, starts with a flashback to the murder house's inhabitants circa 1968, nursing students currently getting ready for a night out.
Hey, Maria. You want to come see the doors with us? I can't. I have an anatomy test tomorrow.
Maria and Gladys stay home, though, and a man soon knocks on their door claiming to be injured, so Maria lets him in and tends to his wounds, soon discovering they are fake. The man then takes the girls by surprise when he suddenly knocks out Maria and pushes Gladys to the ground. The following scene depicts yet another disturbing scene of violence against women. The robbers force them to change into these nurses' costumes, and Maria is tied up and murdered. And later on in the episode, it is also confirmed that Gladys was murdered shortly after by being drowned in a bathtub. Notably, the scene reuses the seminal score from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. In the present day, we sit in on another session between Ben and Tate, where he says some truly gross sexual stuff about Violet. And when Tate also brings up Ben's affair with a younger woman, Ben ends their session early before he receives a phone call from that exact younger woman with some breaking news.
I'm pregnant.
Elsewhere, Violet meets up with Leah, the mean girl who had her face slashed by the infantata, and she is not handling it well.
I thought you hated my baby. I've taken it up. I'm terrified of everything.
Violet tries to convince Leah that there was no other creature in the basement with them and it was just Tate wearing a mask, but I don't think she's even fooling herself. Leah asks if she believes in the devil. Violet says she doesn't.
I've looked into his eyes.
The scene ends here, leaving it ambiguous whether Leah was referring to the infantata or perhaps Tate. That night, we see Tate watch Violet sleep until the security alarm starts blaring, and Ben finds their front door to be wide open. Vivian calls the cops while Ben scopes the house, and in the basement, Ben finds Adelaide rolling a red ball into the darkness. Ben kicks Addie out, and as he goes back upstairs, we see the red ball roll back out from the shadows. During this whole scene of very loud chaos, we never really see how Violet or their dog Hallie react to the alarm going off, so I guess they're just very heavy sleepers. The show then surprisingly jumps into Final Destination territory as the next day, one of Ben's patients describes a recurring dream where they're trapped in an elevator, and, well...
I'm feeling around like, what the hell? Where's my legs, man?
The patient then asks Ben what it's like living in the quote-unquote murder house, which is the first time these words are uttered in the show. As Ben is only aware of the previous owner's incident, he is shocked to learn of the house's nickname and reputation for being a hotspot for true crime fanatics because of its long and gruesome history. After the session, Ben calls Constance to tell her he will no longer be treating Tate because he crossed a line getting involved with Violet. Meanwhile, he also finds that previous patient wandering around the house, clearly fascinated with its history herself. Next door at the Langdon household, Addie is helping Constance make cupcakes poisoned with a vomit inducer intended for Violet. Addie asks why she can't be like the girls in the magazines, and Constance comforts her at first before quickly losing patience with her questions.
You were hatched with other gifts.
Like what?
Oh, Christ on a stick. I don't know. Finger painting.
Based on some advice from his stalker Larry, Ben lies to Vivian and tells her one of his old patients is in desperate need of his service back in Boston. That way he can go there for a couple of days and sort out the drama brewing up with the other woman he just got pregante. I'm sure this is all going to turn out just fine. Constance later delivers her poisoned cupcakes and makes it clear that
they're not for you. At your age, you might as well just crazy glue a stick of butter to your ass. These are for Violet.
Constance then tells Vivian she can tell that she is pregnant.
I could smell that little angel the second I walked in the door. Pheromones.
Wow.
Constance wants to deliver these cupcakes directly to Violet, so when she realizes Violet's not home, she heads out. But Vivian stops her to ask if she can smell anything else about the baby.
2 sugars and a great deal of half and half.
Vivian cuts into one of the cupcakes, and despite Constance's repeated insistence that they're for Violet, Vivian does not give a fuck. Constance tells Vivian that she has 4 kids.
My womb is cursed.
She explains that she and her husband were so beautiful, she believes it pissed off the gods, and that is why each of her children have maladies, as she puts it.
Except for one. He was my gift. But I lost him to other things. Your baby's fine. Enough sad talk.
We then get another taste of the beef between Constance and Moira.
Moira and I go way back. I hope her dusting has improved.
Your sense of humor was and continues to be a delight.
Is everybody crazy?
Ben then departs for Boston under those false pretenses, and Vivian checks in on Violet, who too says she can tell Viv is pregnant.
You want to talk about it?
No, thanks. I'm good.
Vivian leaves and Violet rejects the poisoned cupcake, and in Boston we meet Hayden, the young woman Ben had an affair with. She is played by Kate Mara, who you definitely know from her many film and TV appearances, and before AHS she previously had a recurring role on Nip Tuck. We then catch back up with Hallie the dog as she and Vivian are having a movie night that soon is interrupted by the doorbell. At the door is a woman who repeats the same thing the man who killed the nurses said from the episode's opening scene set in 1968.
I don't want to bother you, but I'm hurt, needing some help.
What happened to you?
Vivian locks the door, but it's soon clear that someone else is already inside the house. What happens next at first seems very inspired by the 2008 horror film The Strangers, as these 3 masked home invaders then gather Vivian and Violet into the same room, but they then unmask and make it clear that they're here to recreate the crimes of R. Franklin, the killer from that opening scene. One of the intruders, by the way, is Ben's patient from before who was wandering the halls and had a recurring nightmare of being split in 2 by an elevator. Violet and Vivian fight back though. And Tate shows up and tells Violet that she needs to get the intruders to the basement. Ben's patient, with the fear of being cut in half by an elevator, eats Violet's abandoned cupcake, which works almost immediately.
Jesus, I'm gonna shit myself.
Not in the staging area.
Next door, Addie interrupts Constance's business meeting.
I told you I was in a business meeting.
To tell her about the invaders at the house next door, but she misunderstands her and locks her in what she calls the bad girl closet. It's a closet full of mirrors where Constance instructs Addie to
look at yourself. Look long and hard.
Sick off the cupcake, Ben's patient wanders the halls looking for her accomplices, but she instead finds Tate, who takes an axe to her stomach. Vivian overpowers the guy who was watching her and beats him repeatedly, while Violet lures the other intruder to the basement, where Tate introduces her to the ghost of Gladys. With Tate and Gladys entertaining her in the basement, it's the perfect opportunity for the Harmon ladies to book it. Back in Boston, Ben waits for Hayden in the waiting room of an abortion clinic, but he leaves when he sees he has 13 missed calls following the home invasion. In the next scene, Ben is back in LA and he's lying to cops about his imaginary patient back in Boston. The cops then inform Ben about the woman he saw earlier in the week who took part in the home invasion. The cops say they think the intruders were a part of a cult replicating famous Los Angeles murders.
Looks like maybe she couldn't go through with it, ran off, her friends went after her, tried to do a Black Dahlia on her.
The cops leave. Violet basically says she respects her mom now that she's fought off some killers, and she thinks her dad's a big old piece of shit. And Vivian says,
"We're selling this house."
With the entire plot of the season in mind, this episode does feel a little bit inconsequential, and the home invasion itself is easy to forget in the grand scheme of all that goes down within these walls. That said, with the copycat aspect of those attempted killers, it is a very creative way to temporarily heighten the stakes while also expanding the lore, as the audience and the Harmons alike are still trying to figure out who we can trust. It's also a very well written and well shot and performed episode that is crucial to understanding the mother-daughter dynamics of both Vivian and Violet, and Constance and Adelaide. Speaking of the latter, their scene in this episode is deeply disturbing to watch. Yet because of Lang's ability to play Constance's many different levels, from sweet and soft-spoken to cold and dry, then jumping all the way to outright evil, you really cannot look away, no matter how atrocious Constance is. As for Jamie Brewer, it is honestly mind-blowing that AHS is her first acting gig, and she can act opposite such a legendary actress in some of the most intense scenes ever put on television. Truly hats off to the both of them for making their dynamic as unnerving and heart-shattering as it is. Episode 3 is the first episode written by Jennifer Salt, who lent her pen to about 2 episodes per season throughout the show's first 5 seasons, and it's also the first episode to be directed by Bradley Becker, one of the show's executive producers and frequent directors. Entitled Murder House, the episode delves even further into the history of this macabre mansion, starting with a flashback to 1983 when Constance Langdon herself lived there with her husband Hugo. This opening scene is another that involves sexual violence, as it explicitly shows Hugo forcing Moira into sex. Constance walks in on this and shoots the young Moira O'Hara in the eye, killing her before turning the gun on Hugo, shooting him thrice in the chest. As Constance breaks down in the master bedroom, the show does a nice transition to the present day as Vivian enters that very room, but instead of finding a young Constance there, it's Ben. Our modern-day couple are arguing over finances, as Ben has just revealed to her that they don't have the funds to move out of the house at that exact moment, and they'll need to sell the house first. The classic haunted house movie excuse. They then demonstrate a perfect example of the gaslighting spouse trope that so many seasons have since pretty much copy and pasted from this season.
Honey, you're having PTSD. We just need to find you a therapist that our insurance will cover right away.
Don't make me feel like I'm crazy.
Viv has other plans, as she's gonna get an estimate on how much renovations would cost on the house so that they can start getting it into better shape for a quick sale.
If you lie to me again, we're through.
After the title sequence, Vivian has Marcy, the realtor, over and insists that she help her and Ben get back the money they put into the house.
You owe our family. Under the law, you are obligated to disclose any material facts that might have influenced our decision to buy this house.
Sounds awfully familiar, right? Constance steals more things from the Harmons and insults Moira for good measure before insinuating that she stole Constance's husband.
I don't want to be here anymore! I'm frightened! I miss my mother!
Every time I find my heart breaking just a sliver for you, I suddenly remember you made this mess for yourself. And I also remember every time I see that ghostly eye that I was and continue to be a hell of a shot.
Within these first handful of episodes, Constance is proving herself to be one of the cruelest villains on TV, from her abuse of Adelaide to the psychological warfare she unleashes onto Moira, who, despite how she may sometimes appear, was only a young woman when she was murdered by Constance directly after being violently raped by Hugo. Moira now is forced to inhabit the boundaries of the site of both of these crimes, where she is unable to escape the torment of her killer. In the next scene, we meet another one of Ben Harmon's patients, and surprise, she's played by none other than Adina Porter, who of course went on to play some huge roles in later AHS seasons, including Dinah Stevens, Beverly Hope, and Lee Harris. A lot of newer or forgetful AHS fans might be surprised to see Adina in such an early season, but in your defense, in this season she plays Sally, a character that is easy to forget because that's kind of the point of her whole character. Sally is going through a divorce, but her monotone delivery of her qualms caused Ben to doze off during their session.
I'm so upset, and I wonder if I'll ever be able to love or be loved again.
And soon enough, Ben wakes up in the backyard with his hands covered in blood. Back inside, he finds Moira cleaning up a pool of blood on the floor. Adding to Ben's confusion, his tape recorder has gone missing, and while he's looking for it, Moira's sexual harassment of Ben goes further than ever before, which causes Ben to grab Moira and scream at her. Vivian walks in at just that moment, then the three of them have a discussion that amplifies the irony of Moira's two distinctly different appearances, depending on which gender is looking at her. But Vivian says that it might just be best if Moira finds work elsewhere.
Just toss me out like a piece of trash, will you? No, you won't. Not this time. I deserve respect.
Moira threatens to press charges if Ben touches her again, or if either of them try to wrongfully terminate her. So with that settled, Moira heads out for her lunch break. But later, she continues her sexual harassment before informing Ben that he has a guest in his office, none other than Hayden. Hayden tells Ben that she has decided to keep the baby, she's moving to LA, and she plans on being financially supported by Ben, and it's not really up for discussion. A detective then shows up and asks Ben about Sally, Adina Porter's character, who is now a missing person. AHS then does something that it will soon become known for. It dramatizes a true crime in American history. In this scene, it's the murder of actor Sal Mineo, who starred opposite James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. In real life, at least on official records, Mineo was stabbed by a mugger in a quote-unquote random robbery. However, because of the fact that this case remained cold for about 5 years and a ton of flimsy evidence, there was a lot of speculation at the time that there might have been personal or even homophobic motives behind his murder, as Mineo was open about his bisexuality and his attackers did not steal money from his wallet. Witnesses that night also saw a white man fleeing the scene, a description that does not match the man who ended up being convicted for the crime 5 years after the fact, Lionel Ray Williams, who was sentenced to 51 years of the crime. The case against Williams, though, includes several witnesses claiming Williams himself told them he killed the actor, as well as him being linked to a nearby robbery on the same night. Although the investigation into that robbery seemingly relied on a lot of police lineups, which I believe to be an extremely flawed practice, Williams was released on parole in 1990, but maintains his innocence regarding Mineo's death. Frankly, the resources about this case are pretty limited, but I wanted to present both sides as best as I could so you know a bit of the context of this scene that admittedly isn't super integral to this episode. So the show's depiction of Sal Mineo's death intentionally corroborates Lionel Ray Williams' innocence, as it depicts Mineo cruising in an alleyway when he comes across the wrong guy, a white man who declares before killing the famed actor. As we soon see, this is all a part of a bus tour of famous Los Angeles murder sites, one that Vivian noticed has a stop at her house earlier in this episode, so now she's sitting in on the tour to hear all of the gory details about her new home. The tour guide acknowledges the Williams case while emphasizing that LA locals believe Lionel Ray Williams is innocent, and Mineo's death was a hate crime. I don't mind this first instance of AHS covering true crime, since it presents a commonly believed alternative narrative to the official report of Sal Mineo's death, which I do believe to be entirely based on no direct evidence. Later instances of the show doing similar true crime references, though, I would argue are less well-intentioned. But this Eternal Darkness tour quickly moves on to the next stop, which is our all too familiar
murder house.
Instead of hearing this guy tell us the house's history, the show jumps to a flashback set in the 1920s where we meet the couple who constructed the mansion, Charles and Nora Montgomery. Charles is played by actor Matt Ross, and Nora is, of course, played by another AHS legend, Lily Rabe, who has gone on to appear in 9 out of the series' 12 seasons, and she truly has a huge impact in each of her roles, no matter how big. The show depicts Charles as a mad scientist addicted to his own drugs with a knack for making Frankenstein-esque experiments. The one he's working on when we're first introduced to him appears to be a two-headed pig with wings, which is an absolutely horrifying sight. Nora appears to be fed up with Charles and his batshit experiments, and when she calls him up for dinner, he is sent into a fit. At the dinner table, we meet their baby, named Thaddeus Montgomery, who is currently caught in the middle of his parents' highly dramatic argument. Nora's not just upset with Charles' freakish projects, she's also upset that she's been having to deal with bill collectors all week long, and Charles is not making any money. So Nora arranges for Charles to treat a friend of hers who is willing to pay $60 for an under-the-table abortion. Soon enough, Dorothy Hudson shows up at their front door, while Nora makes sure she gets the cash first before giving her some sort of anesthetic and rushing Dorothy down to the basement. Dorothy Hudson was the first of many of Charles Montgomery's long list of patients, and she was played by actress Abby Cobb, who I actually had a chance to talk to recently while we were both guests on the AHS-themed episode of the horror podcast Half Hour of Horror with hosts Aaron McLean and my pal Chase. So here's just some of what she had to say about her experiences working on this short but integral scene to the season's history.
I was actually, they switched around the episodes once they decided to edit and air them. So when I filmed it, it was the first thing they filmed after the pilot, and they had no idea how big it was going to be. The pilot used the real house and the real exteriors, and my day of filming, I guess, was the very first time they were on a soundstage with the replicated house.
Interesting.
Yeah, so they built the whole thing again at, I think it was Sony, the Sony lot, or no, 20th Century Fox lot. From episode 102, Murder House, back when no one knew. I have a copy of the script.
Back when it was 102.
I have my stockings from 1917. They made me try on, all the clothes were real from like I tried on a dress from pre-Titanic for that show. This is a wardrobe that says, please use the garter belt to hold up your stockings and put the garter over the money to hold the money. Thank you. So I had fake money. I guess I had to tie the garter. I was supposed to pay for the abortion and they murder me. I think that's what happens. I don't know. It was just lots of crying.
Abby has worked on so many cool shows and films, including Them, which I still need to get around to watching, and another show within the vast Ryan Murphy universe that we've talked about already a lot in this video, 911, which she also shared some really cool stories from in that podcast, so definitely check it out in the description box below if you guys want to hear more from Abby, as well as mine and the hosts' unscripted thoughts on each and every AHS season. But back to the plot. While hearing some of this history on the tour bus, Vivian believes her period has started, which is typically not supposed to occur while pregnant. So she panics, leaves the bus, and runs into the house. Cut to the following doctor's appointment, where Vivian says that the bleeding stopped the moment she entered the house, and the doc ensures her that a little bleeding can occur and everything on the inside looks normal. Vivian mentions that they're planning on moving out of the house, but the doctor warns her,
no moving while you're pregnant. Death, divorce, moving. These are the 3 most stressful events of—
And by the way, This doctor's name is Dr. Hall, which is just one letter away from Dr. Hill, the doctor from Rosemary's Baby, which is a clear influence on this season, especially the pregnancy storyline, so I wouldn't be surprised if this was a subtle nod to that film. 12 seasons later, the show would again reference this doctor in another Rosemary's Baby inspired season, Delicate, which features a Dr. Hill as well. During the appointment, Ben experiences flashbacks of Hayden before fainting. Ben is later approached by Larry, and Ben threatens him once again to stay away.
Oh, I understand.
And at home, Ben goes on a fervent search for his missing tape recorder before waking up in the backyard again. Inside, Vivian answers the doorbell to none other than the ghost of Nora Montgomery, who then gives Vivian a tour of her house. But when they get to the kitchen, Nora is horrified by the renovations that have been made. Nora brings up her son before doing some classic ghost shit.
I had a child once.
Aside from Nora vanishing, the reveal of the fatal injury on her backside feels like a potential nod to The Sixth Sense. While mindlessly digging the hole he started digging earlier, Ben is approached by the detective who informs him that they found Sally Freeman, and she had Ben's tape recorder.
Sally was admitted to University Hospital 2 days ago. Failed suicide attempt. Found in a hotel downtown.
The detective then plays the audio of Ben's session with Sally, which consists of Sally screaming that she's in pain to a completely silent Ben before taking a letter opener from his desk to herself, which explains the pools of blood from after Ben blacked out. You might have also noticed the detective mentioning that Sally was found in a hotel in downtown Los Angeles, and there's nothing disproving it if you wanted to imagine that hotel is none other than the Hotel Cortez from Hotel, although there are obviously many hotels in downtown LA. But I wouldn't be super shocked if Ryan and Brad had a haunted hotel season on their minds as early as season 1, especially since their research on Los Angeles true crime stories had to have overlapped with some of the major real-world inspirations for AHS Hotel, including LA's own Cecil Hotel. Ben gets a call from Dr. Hall, who did a blood test on him after he fainted, and she says she found an opiate that was banned in the 30s in his blood, suggesting Moira could be drugging him. But the call is interrupted by Hayden at the door, who comes in guns blazing, ready to reveal all to Vivian.
I'm pregnant! This is Harmon!
Ben informs her that Viv isn't home, and the two agree to discuss the matter over lunch. However, on the way out,
You know what I'd love? A big, thick, juicy...
she gets knocked out by Larry with a shovel, who then kills her by repeating that action a few more times for good measure. Ben then attacks Larry before going to hold Hayden.
What are you doing? You taking a DNA bath?
You're a murderer! You're a murderer!
Yeah.
Larry says he's just done Ben a huge favor. Now he doesn't have to worry about breaking Hayden's pregnancy to Vivian, and he doesn't have any blood on his hands. As for Larry, well, he's out of prison because of his terminal cancer diagnosis, so I guess he's just living every day like a GTA online server, no consequences.
You got a nice good hole started here. See? We're halfway there.
Larry then reminds Ben that he'll leave him alone at the small cost of $1,000. But Ben gets sick inside while Larry makes some serious progress on the hole. Eventually, Larry comes across some long-buried human remains, and as Moira cries from inside, we see her maid's uniform, indicating this is where Constance buried her after her murder. Larry adds Hayden's body to the pit, and we fast forward to the construction of a gazebo over the gravesite, an idea that was planted to Ben by Constance earlier in the episode, as a way to thwart Moira's escape plan that has been going on under our noses this whole time. Constance confirms this by telling Moira,
Now you're stuck here forever.
this episode is a classic one in my opinion, giving us a lot of backstory while still accelerating the plot enough that by the end of it, it's nearly impossible to not want to watch the next episode. It does feature another sexual assault scene in the flashback when Hugo rapes Moira, and compared to the scene in episode 1, this one is much more explicit and violent and triggering, for lack of a better term. That feeling is amplified by Moira being immediately killed by Constance afterwards, and throughout the episode, while Constance haunts Moira's afterlife, she refuses to acknowledge that what Hugo did to her was rape. The show isn't saying Constance is right. It's very clear that Moira was raped, murdered, and is now being tormented for eternity, all of which are heinous acts committed to a young woman by her employers. That is all very clearly communicated in the show, but that does not make you feel any less gross watching it unfold. In combination with Constance's inhumane treatment of her daughter Adelaide, especially in these first few episodes, Constance is being presented as a deeply spiteful person with truly dark capabilities. In my review section for episode 1 in this video, I was talking about how the assault scene in the pilot is handled relatively more tastefully than a lot of the other similar scenes in the show, and it also holds a lot of plot significance. While this scene I would say is less tasteful, it still holds a good amount of plot significance. Whether it was necessary for the story or not, that's up for you to decide. But I want to bring up a separate scene from a different season that feels like the complete opposite of both instances that have occurred in season 1 so far, and that would be what is, off of the top of my head, the most gratuitous and unnecessary scene of sexual assault in the history of the show, which I believe occurs in season 5, episode 1, largely because it serves next to no purpose in the plot, and in my opinion, it was not handled with care, especially based on how Ryan Murphy and actor Max Greenfeld, who participated in the scene, spoke about said scene in an interview. Of course, this scene in episode 3 is definitely an escalation of the assault scene in episode 1, but not yet has the show desensitized itself so much that it stops paying attention to how its victims are being treated and portrayed. While we're still speaking on Moira, I think her story reveal in this episode was the strongest aspect of this particular episode. At first, you think that the 1986 flashback might be suggesting that Moira's present-day sexual harassment of Ben may just be some form of an unhealthy cycle of her trauma, but in the end, she was actually using him as a means to extract her remains from the grounds, which would then free her soul from being trapped in the murder house, where in her case, the living haunt the dead. And most of what I just said is told to us in this episode without any dialogue, which I absolutely love because it shows the show is putting a lot of trust in its audience, and that's something that AHS and a lot of shows these days do not do anymore. Aside from obviously strong performances from Conroy and Lang, Lily Rabe also gets to do the most as Nora Montgomery in this episode, and it is also great. Episode 4 kicks off a 2-part Halloween episode, and it is the first AHS episode to be written by producer James Wong, who you may also know for writing and directing Final Destination 1 and 3, not to be confused with James Wan, another prominent horror storyteller. The episode starts with yet another flashback, but this time it's just a year before the Harmons made their move to LA, when the ill-fated gay couple was living in the murder house. Their names are Chad and Patrick, and their relationship is troubled to say the least, with Patrick boldly admitting to cheating after being confronted by Chad. These two are played by some frequent Ryan Murphy collaborators. Patrick is played by Teddy Sears, and Chad is played by Zachary Quinto. Oddly enough, this former on-screen couple reunited recently as stars of the 2024 NBC medical procedural Brilliant Minds. Patrick and Chad lament about the decay of their relationship and their inability to call it off due to both of their financial futures being tied to this house, which they are unable to sell due to the state of the housing market circa 2010. And probably that Eternal Darkness tour isn't helping either. Later, Chad is visited by the Rubber Man, and he too assumes his spouse is behind the getup until he starts to attack before snapping Chad's neck in the apple bobbing bucket. By the time Patrick walks in on this, it is too late. This means their death was no murder-suicide as it was ruled, but they were actually murdered by this mysterious Rubber Man who is also haunting the Harmons. In the present day, Marcy proposes the Harmons hire professional decorators to zhuzh up the place and also give the exterior a spooky seasonal flair, since Halloween is right around the corner. Next door, Constance's boyfriend Travis reads a book to Adelaide about the Celtic roots of Halloween, which include the notion that on October 31st, the veil between the living and the dead is lifted and ghosts are able to walk amongst the living.
No way I ever want to be a ghost. It's so sad.
Constance scolds Addie for flirting with Travis, and she forces her to tell her what she whispered to him. So Addie admits that she wishes to dress like a pretty girl for Halloween.
You can go as Snoopy again. The costume will still fit if you lay off those chocolate chips.
Before Constance departs, Addie tells her,
The dead can walk freely on Halloween.
We've always known that.
Larry rings the doorbell to take his blackmail up a notch, threatening to report Ben's gazebo gravesite to the city.
Give me my treat. You don't want the trick.
But Ben is still not budging. Later, Ben sees Tate.
I don't want to be like this. I want to be a good person.
Ben says he'll meet with Tate again, but it can't be at his house, so they will meet later for coffee. Vivian gets a security system installed, and she's also hired a security guard named Luke, who will appear briefly a few times throughout the season, but his role is pretty small considering he's a fairly well-known actor, Morris Chestnut from Boys in the Hood and several other film and television shows. Out front, Vivian meets the ghosts of Chad and Patrick, who, off of Viv's suggestion that they're Marcy's decorators, take on the job. As our two toxic couples carve pumpkins together, the Harmons get a little taste of Chad and Patrick's petty bickering.
I love Halloween. So does Patrick, because the bars are just awash in twinks with six-packs and revealing outfits. Isn't that right, Pat?
Have another drink, dear. Crafting brings out his inner George and Martha.
The gays then suggest that they tear down the new gazebo, which makes Ben a bit uneasy, causing him to accidentally slice his finger. So Patrick and Ben go upstairs to retrieve a first aid kit, where Patrick then gropes Ben out of nowhere, but Ben refuses these non-consensual advances. Downstairs, Chad and Vivian discuss their cheating spouses, and Chad tells Viv that you always gotta check the phone bill. In her bedroom, Violet is jump scared by Addie hiding under the bed.
Trick or treat! Smell my feet! Give me something good to eat! Addie! I want to be a pretty girl for Halloween!
Addie asks, or demands rather, that Violet give her a makeover so her dream costume of being a pretty girl can come true this Halloween. Luckily, Violet's down, and the girls get to know each other during the process of the makeover. Addie prods about Violet's feelings for Tate, while still not revealing that they're siblings, because of course the Harmons still don't know that Tate is a Langdon. Besides, of course, Ben. Violet also lets Addie know for the 100th time that they'd prefer if she stopped breaking and entering.
But I like it here. My friends are here. Wow. Violet? Beautiful.
Addie's joy in response to her makeup is sadly short-lived, as Constance is completely set off by it when she returns home.
Wash that smut off your face!
No! I want to be a pretty girl!
Well, you're not a pretty girl! And you know it!
After some more extreme emotional abuse, Adelaide runs to her room. Then, in a scene that's highly disturbing but in a less overt way, Violet goes down to the basement where she is attacked by the rubber man, who covers her mouth and pushes her backward before he begins to laugh and remove his mask. It's Tate, who then instantly makes out with her. Violet insists she wasn't scared by Tate's, prank, and Tate takes this as a challenge. So he and Violet use a spirit board while expanding some of Charles Montgomery's gruesome story through flashbacks. After the Montgomerys' secret abortion service went on for a while, one of the patients told her boyfriend what she had done, and this man particularly wanted revenge. What happens next is clearly inspired by the true crime story of the Lindbergh kidnapping and murder circa 1932. As in the show, little baby Thaddeus Montgomery has been stolen from his crib through an open window. Flashbacks then show us the fate of Thaddeus as detectives bring evidence boxes that contain body parts in separate jars. I'm sorry if you expected things to get more pleasant as the season goes on, because that is definitely not the case. Of course, Charles then got to work turning his own son into a Frankenstein-esque experiment, horrifying Nora.
What he created was ungodly and monstrous.
As Tate concludes his ghost story, he tells Violet that what remains of Thaddeus still lives in the house to this day. And just to connect those final dots, if you haven't yourself, Charles turned Thaddeus into what we now call the Infantata.
Oh my god. You are so full of shit.
Violet then says she's annoyed that they always hang out in the basement and she wants to go out on a date. So Tate jumps at the opportunity to take Violet out on a date tomorrow on Halloween, which begins in the very next scene as Tate and Ben meet up in a public park for their recently agreed upon session. During this, Ben cries as he tells Tate he sees himself in him.
Hey. It's gonna be okay, Dr. Harmon. I'm sorry.
We then catch up with the Langdons, brace yourselves, as Addie has decided overnight that she's too old for trick-or-treating and she won't be going out in costume this year. But Constance has her own fucked up way of compromising with her daughter, as she's purchased her an unsettling mask which she says will help her be a quote-unquote pretty girl. One thing this season absolutely nails is making you feel sick to your stomach, especially in any scene involving Constance or Tate Langdon. And Jessica Lange especially is able to deliver some of the most inhumane lines in a way that cuts the audience to the core, yet still seems genuine to this layered character. Next door, Ben gets dressed up as Dracula, inspired by a flashback he had to Violet dressing up as Dracula as a kid.
Have you seen my fangs? Fangs are locked.
Vivian took the gay ghost's advice and checked the phone records, and Hayden's number is obviously all over it. Despite Viv's prior ultimatum that if Ben continues to lie to her, they're through, Ben continues to lie to her about the phone records and seeing Hayden while he was in Boston. He claims he threatened her with legal action if she continued to harass him, and that since then Hayden hasn't contacted him.
But believe me, Hayden is over.
It's Hayden.
Downstairs, gay ghost Chad puts the finishing touches on transforming the mansion into an elaborate haunted house, while also making the Harmons' mood even worse by trashing their looks.
What's the matter?
He doesn't like our costumes.
In a reference to Chad being particular about the type of apples they used in the episode's opener, he begins to get pissed about the presence of gala apples in his bucket. When he realizes Ben bought them, he begins to lay into him like he's a hostess who bumped his reservation.
I think you're overreacting.
Because I'm the only one who actually gives a shit? I think you should just leave.
You think we should just leave our house?
It's not your house.
Get out! Yeah, leave. We are not leaving this house. Get out! Get out! Get out!
Soon after, Vivian makes Ben leave the house as well, saying she does not believe him.
And I don't want to live with suspicion anymore. So I want you to go. I want you to go.
However, just at that moment, Vivian begins to shout in pain, saying the baby is kicking, which does not happen this early in a pregnancy. As he takes Vivian to the hospital, he tells Violet not to answer the door for anyone, but Adelaide soon wants to show Violet her costume, so she waits at the front door as Violet ignores her, where she is soon bullied by some local girls. Wanting to be a part of their group, Adelaide chases after them, but the mask's low visibility causes tragedy to strike as an oncoming car barrels right over her, not ever stopping. Eventually, Constance is drawn to the commotion when the paramedics arrive and announce that Adelaide is dying. Lange delivers a truly heartbreaking performance of grief, perhaps guilt, and most definitely desperation as Constance tries to carry a dying Addie to the grounds of the murder house so that she can forever roam its halls.
If you can't help me, then get out of the goddamn way!
Just let her...
No!
But it is too late. Where Adelaide's spirit goes from here is a mystery, but I like to think it was better than a life in the murder house with her horribly abusive mother and all the other monsters that frequent its halls. At the hospital with Vivian, there's this random joke with 2 other emergency room patients that I think is a very unexpected moment of levity in this disturbing episode.
No, not his face. That's fake. He broke his leg.
Again, Vivian says her symptoms stopped as soon as she left home, and the nurse does some good old-fashioned medical gaslighting.
Well, I'm sure it's not kicks that you're feeling. The baby's only the size of a kidney bean at 8 weeks.
I know, that's why I'm concerned. I feel like there's something wrong.
Well, I'm sure it's just gas. So.
However, during the ultrasound, the nurse faints at what she sees. Since the dead can travel freely on Halloween night, we then see Moira visit her mother at a care home where she is on life support. Moira apologizes to her mother for not being there for her during the rest of her life before she disconnects her mother's access to oxygen, which eventually stops her heartbeat. Her mother's spirit then appears behind her and invites her to come with her.
I want to, but I can't, Mother. I can't.
And in a heartbreaking change of shots, Moira's mother is gone. Back at the murder house, Larry has gone completely unhinged, and he's now demanding his $1,000, so Violet calls Ben, who makes sure Violet stays locked inside. But by the time the Harmons get home from the hospital, though, their house alarm is blaring, and Violet is gone. But there's a knock at the door. Much like episode 2, episode 4 puts a slight pause on the major conflicts and characters of the season, in this case to focus on the very complicated relationship between Adelaide and Constance, and taking that relationship, of course, to dramatic heights. The episode also gives us an entertaining backstory on another one of the house's previous owners, as Chad and Patrick have finally showed up for the haunt. Chad and Patrick are stereotypical rich LA gays, but their presence in this episode brings a lot of levity, especially when they mistakenly take on the role as the Harmons' Halloween decorators, and levity is much needed in an episode that also brings Adelaide's storyline to a shocking end in what is a defining moment of the show. For first-time viewers, Addie's early exit was a complete shock, and going forward it puts a lot of emotional weight on the season, driving much of Constance's motives. Aside from being a tearjerker, the episode is also scary, as you might expect from a Halloween episode of a horror show. And as for the disturbing mystery of who inhabited the rubber suit, specifically in the pilot episode, while that is still ongoing, this episode does seem to point a finger in Tate's direction, which just adds about 15 new levels of disturbing to the whole thing. But at this point in the season, they still want to keep us guessing, and they don't want us to know all the answers quite yet. The second half of the Halloween episode begins by filling us in on what happened between the time Violet called her parents and when they got home. She goes to her room where Tate happens to be throwing stones at her window. He tells her to go down to the basement where he gives her a rose. They then go out on their date on the beach. Outside, Ben attacks Larry and accuses him of setting this all up as an elaborate hoax since Hayden can't truly be dead since she was just at his front door.
Oh, that's bullshit! I want some goddamn answers!
He'll kill Larry if he steps foot on the property again. Tate and Violet make out on the beach, and Violet says she wants to take this further, but Tate says they can't, and he blames it on his antidepressants. Tate then tells her that this beach used to be his hideaway when he felt misunderstood by the world. But eventually they are approached by a group of gory teens. The teens then begin to berate Tate.
Good job, Tate. You finally came out of hiding. We've been waiting for you.
Tate claims he doesn't know these guys, and they let him and Violet walk away for now. Meanwhile, Vivian has a heated phone call with the ghost of Hayden, who insists that she ask Ben about what he was really up to in Boston, written in the fog of the mirror. Convinced Hayden's broken into the house, Vivian says they've got to call the cops, but Ben says he'll handle it himself, and in the basement, Ben and Ghost Hayden have a long, drawn-out screaming match before Larry sneaks up behind Ben and knocks him out.
I really owe you an apology.
In the front yard, Ghost Chad destroys the decorations he and the Harmons worked on together.
I'm sorry, Vivian. I really am. But you ruined my Halloween, and now you have to pay.
He threatens Vivian, but she soon gets inside just in time, where Hallie leads her to the bathroom, where Hayden has lit a fire with the help of chronic arsonist Larry Harvey. Violet asks Tate about the kids at the beach, but Tate continues to insist he didn't know them. Then, as if this house wasn't crowded enough, those very teens arrive on the lawn. Then the show does everything in its power to convince us poor innocent Hallie has been blown up in the microwave a la Mr. Guinea, but I will not put you all through that suspense because Hallie does indeed survive Halloween night. Violet goes outside to reason with the teens, but they all trauma dump on her about the losses of their futures. Violet's obviously confused, so the teens then give her a bunch of clues regarding the mystery of their connection to Tate, before Tate leads them away from Violet by just bolting down the street. And realize Hallie's alright, thank God. Hayden again tells Viv that she has to know what went down in Boston.
I have to talk about Boston, about the pregnancy, about everything. I told you I'm pregnant? What? You're pregnant?
Hayden then breaks a picture frame and begins to threateningly walk towards Vivian. Meanwhile, downstairs, Larry douses the house in gasoline until he is stopped by Chad. And in the basement, Ben is awoken by Nora Montgomery, who tells him he urgently needs to save his baby.
I will not permit another failure in this house.
Thanks to a panic button, the Harmon's security team is alerted and the whole situation is diffused. Then we see a slight flashback to Constance visiting Adelaide at the morgue, where she finally sees her daughter's beauty.
Look at you, a pretty girl.
But as he breaks down, he begins to have flashbacks to his recurring dreams he was telling Ben about, and finally revealing to the audience that they were not fantasy after all. As the sun begins to rise, the murder house ghosts who went out for the holiday begin to return home. Moira, the twins, the gays, and the nurses. Kicked out for real by Vivian, Ben packs a bag and heads out the front door like a sad puppy. As integral as this episode is to the plot of the season, I would say it is definitely less effective at building tension when compared to the previous two episodes specifically, since this one largely focuses on the teen romance between Tate and Violet, which has personally never been a relationship I love to watch unfold. Similarly, another focus of this episode is the ghost of Hayden giving Ben all sorts of headaches, and Hayden, especially in ghost form, yells even more than Ben, and especially when they do share most of their scenes, the Ghost Hayden storyline is definitely another one of my least favorites of the season, so the fact that it is a focus of this episode as well probably contributes to why I'm not as fond of this episode as every other one we've watched so far. And it also feels like Ghost Hayden's storyline cuts into Moira's screen time a bit, and it shows in this episode that Moira's not really in it as much. So yeah, the Larry, Ben, Ghost Hayden storyline, much like Violet and Tate's romance, is just not as enticing to me personally as the plotlines more directly involving characters like Constance, Moira, or Vivian. Episode 5 is still a pretty standard episode, especially in today's standards, and if you are some way invested in Violet and Tate's romance and the stakes of Ben and Vivian's already doomed marriage matter to you, then this episode probably has a better chance at holding its own to you. But coming off of the previous two episodes, which I would say are the standouts so far when it comes to delivering a scary and complete episode that also makes you want to watch the next one, I would say episode 5 pumps the brakes a little bit. Episode 6 begins with what I'd argue is the most infamous scene in this show's entire history, as we bear witness to Tate's 1994 school shooting from the perspective of his victims. Just for some personal backstory, I truly got into AHS around 2014, right when I was entering high school, and during an era where school shootings were starting to become more and more frequent in the United States. That statistical trend has unfortunately continued to rise ever since. All of that to say, the horror depicted in this scene definitely hit home to lots of teenage fans at the time, and despite the scene itself being based on the events of the 1999 Columbine massacre, unfortunately school shootings proved to be more common year by year in the United States. I won't be showing any clips from this scene because it's truly hard to watch and I honestly don't want to edit it. But after murdering several of his classmates in cold blood, Tate returns home to the murder house where the authorities soon have him cornered in his bedroom while you hear Constance protesting from downstairs. But before any triggers are pulled, the show cuts to the title sequence, still not ripping off that final band-aid on what has been painfully obvious for quite some time now, that Tate is a ghost. Back in the present day, though, they rip that band-aid right off as Violet discovers a 15-year-old headline thanks to the clues given to her by the ghosts of the teens. And she proceeds to learn about the extent of Tate's horrific crimes before going downstairs looking for her mother. Vivian is not home, but of course, Constance is. Constance figured Violet would find out about Tate soon enough, so she's here to share how she learned how to forgive Tate's actions.
We were living here when Tate lost his way. And I believe that the house drove him to it.
This truly sparks a major narrative question that echoes throughout the season. Is Constance and Larry's theory about the house corrupting otherwise good people true? Violet does not believe this, so Constance invites Violet over to her place where she's got some backup in the form of a medium Constance found years later on Craigslist, Billy Dean Howard. Billy is of course the first American Horror Story character to be played by Sarah Paulson, who has gone on to define so much of the show throughout her 9 seasons. Before AHS, Paulson was very much a working actor in several theater productions, films, and television shows, including an episode of Nip Tuck, which luckily brought the forces of Paulson and Ryan Murphy together for the first, but far from the last time. Billy Dean then makes a distinction between the two types of ghosts, the ones who knowingly wander the earth in refusal of moving on due to vengeful reasons, or there's also some who wander the earth not even knowing that they're dead, and Tate falls into the second category. Not the first nor the last time that the show will take a page from the playbook of The Sixth Sense. Constance says that her goal with getting Tate to see Ben was to hopefully ease Tate into realizing he's dead on his own, but since that's not working,
we must help him cross over, Violet.
Violet's still in denial of the supernatural until Billy delivers a message from Violet's grandmother that hits home.
I don't understand you. Never will understand you.
Does that mean anything to you?
Vivian dreams of her fetus having claws, then she gets Luke, the security guy, to do a sweep of the house before they overshare enough to learn something they have in common. Both of their spouses have cheated on them.
With another man.
It was a woman.
Then Ben sees a patient named Derek who is terrified of urban legends. Sound familiar? That's because this scene serves as the jumping off point for a memorable in-universe urban legend called The Piggy Man that once again gets explored in AHS Season 6 Roanoke. Derek is played by Eric Stonestreet, who may be best known for his role on Modern Family, but like so many others in this season, he too first worked with Ryan Murphy in an episode of Nip Tuck. Derek name drops some other famous urban legends, including Bloody Mary, Candyman, and The Lady in White, which aside from Candyman, which they wouldn't have the rights to, AHS has adapted those other urban legends in one way or another later on in its run. Derek says he knows these stories are BS, but that doesn't stop the fear from being absolutely debilitating. Recently, the urban legend of the Piggy Man has tormented him the most. Piggy Man operates just like Candyman or Bloody Mary. Say his name 3 times and...
Here, Piggy, pig.
Don't worry, that's just Derek's anxious vision, as he says he's never actually said those dreaded 3 words in front of a mirror. But just as things are getting started, Ben ends his 2-minute-long appointment and says they'll regroup on Wednesday.
In the meantime, I want you to shave. In a mirror? Can you try, Derek? Yeah?
In a short scene before this, Violet is shown self-harming again while seeing a flash of Tate. After Ben's session, Violet enters sobbing, claiming that the darkness has her. Constance comes over and gives Vivian a pig's throat and pancreas because she believes it will help with the morning sickness, and she instructs Moira to fry it up like she used to do for her.
We need that baby. We need another sweet child around here.
Moira fries up the throat, but leaves the pancreas raw and tries to guilt-trip Vivian into eating it. Then, I guess it's Wednesday because Derek's back for his next appointment already. I guess Ben's trying exposure therapy because he makes him go into the bathroom with the lights off where Derek tries the Piggy Man chant. Lucky for Derek, no Piggy Man gets summoned. But unfortunately, that is the bathtub where Gladys drowned, so of course she had to pay him a visit. Violet meets with Leah again at the empty swimming pool / skate park, and just like the last time we saw her, she's talking about the devil.
The devil is real. He can be beautiful. Because he's a fallen angel, and he used to be God's favorite.
Leah proceeds to retell a story from the Bible like it's the plot of a young adult novel. It's the story of the woman giving birth and the dragon with 7 heads, which represents Satan. As Leah puts it, in heaven, there's this woman giving birth and the dragon is there,
waiting so he can eat her baby. But the Archangel Michael, he hurls the dragon down to earth. From that moment on, the red dragon hates the woman and declares war on her and all of her children.
Since they've both been having trouble sleeping since their encounter with what Leah believes to be Satan, Violet asks for some of Leah's sleeping pills. Violet later visits Westfield High, where she meets one of Tate's victims who survived, a teacher who was left partially paralyzed by the shooting. Clearly trying to fact-check the whole "the house's darkness corrupted Tate" theory, Violet prods at this teacher for if Tate was always so troubled.
I just want to know why he did it.
Me too.
Why are you bullshitting me?
Violet is so audacious the way she treats this guy, who himself has likely dealt with a huge lack of closure for the past 15 years due to Tate dying before any motive could be revealed, just like all those vengeful ghosts we saw earlier. At the house, Moira takes a gift that Constance left for Vivian out of the fridge, another piece of raw meat, which Vivian soon discovers is a large brain. But for some reason, she barely hesitates before giving it a try, then going absolutely ham on it. While looking for Tate, Violet sees a bunch of the house's spiritual inhabitants, including the twins, the nurses, the killers who killed the nurses, as well as Charles Montgomery. Scared back into her room, she finds a message from Tate, which, in combination with the mayhem downstairs, causes her to break down. She then tries to end her life by taking a handful of Leah's sleeping pills, but Tate eventually finds her, drags her to the shower, where he tries to get her to vomit. Afterwards, Violet wakes up. In another session, Ben demands Derek go home and repeat the Piggy Man mantra in full.
I can do it. The moment you do, you'll be free.
That evening, Derek does just that, and, well, I'll let you see how it went.
Here, piggy, piggy, pig.
Who you calling a pig?
A robber who just so happened to be hiding in Derek's shower, ironically shoots him directly in the head, killing him instantly. How the hell do we break this to Mitchell? After discovering that the nurse who fainted during the ultrasound quit her job right after the fact, Vivian tracks her down to a church to ask some follow-ups. Her name is Angela, and she's afraid to sit too close to Vivian, and that's because she soon reveals that
I saw the unclean thing, what you carry in your womb, the plague of nations, the beast.
Okay, so you didn't see anything, so...
Vivian is skeptical of the devil living inside of her, so she leaves this church while Angela yells scripture. Billie Dean Howard tells Constance that Adelaide's spirit is upset with her, and Constance says she wants to speak with her.
Talk to her. She's here. Come on.
Constance then apologizes for never saying how she truly felt about her.
I'm so proud of you, Addie. I admire you so for what you were able to overcome. And I think you're beautiful. Addie, I think you are the most beautiful girl I ever met.
Billie Dean tells Constance that Addie says she's grateful that her spirit was unable to live on in the murder house because she now fears her brother, Tate, as I guess she has learned about his crimes in the afterlife. This triggers a flashback to Constance's perspective of the police raid on the murder house following the school shooting right before Tate's inevitable death. And upstairs, we see once and for all the moment Tate is gunned down after he makes a last-ditch grab for a handgun. Then back in the present day, while reading a book that Tate once checked out about birds from his high school library, Tate finally talks to Violet again.
I like birds too.
Why do you like them?
Because they can fly away when things get too crazy, I guess.
Through tears, Tate tells Violet he's noticed that she's been colder to him lately, and he wants to know if he should just leave her alone. Oh, and...
I love you.
Violet then holds Tate in her bed as we cut to credits. As you just saw, episode 6, just like so many other episode 6s in American Horror Story history, is a doozy. Aside from being everything else the show has established itself as, it still manages to be an unusually depressing episode, from the flashbacks to Tate's horrific crimes, as well as Violet's suicide attempt. And by the end of it, we see the true beginning of Violet and Tate's toxic tangle when they exchange I love yous, and boy am I looking forward to talking about how that turns out in the second half of the season. The episode also gives us 2 recurring figures in the lore of AHS, Billie Dean Howard and the Piggy Man. As for Billie Dean, her introduction is perfect, and she immediately sets up another emotional Constance monologue when she connects Constance to Adelaide from beyond the grave. And while Constance apologizes to Adelaide for never telling her how proud she was of her, she doesn't apologize for the years of abuse. It's another Constance moment that just is oozing with extra layers of darkness that, in my experience, you really only find within the realm of these first few seasons of American Horror Story. Constance is also perturbed that Adelaide has discovered the truth about Tate in the afterlife, and she now fears her brother. As episode 6 concludes with Violet in Tate's arms, the major question that the first half of this season poses is whether or not Tate was truly possessed by the house's darkness when he committed his crimes both in 1994 and while he's been trapped within the walls of the house. And also by proxy, the character of Larry Harvey is also posing this same question as he has taken the Amityville defense after murdering his entire family in the murder house. So, will the season answer this ambiguity, or will it leave it open to interpretation a la The Shining? Well, you'll have to wait for part 2 of my deep dive to know my interpretation, but I thank you guys so much for your patience on this one. If you are a part of my Patreon, you know that there's been some life changes going on, and that has contributed to why this video is later than I wanted it to come out. But I did want to make sure I gave this integral season the proper reappraisal and also talk about the things that I know are kind of hard to talk about this season, which is partly why I've avoided doing it for so long, and also why I've not rewatched it truly since 2018. That was the last time I rewatched Murder House in full. But speaking of my Patreon, for just $1.99 a month, you can gain access to exclusive videos as well as receive early access to videos just like this one. And for the long form videos, I also try to do a lot of sneak peeks with it's taking me a while like this one. I'm gonna try my best to keep this video monetized, but if you see in the comments that it's demonetized, consider sending a couple dollars my way on Patreon for just this month. I won't mind if you cancel it. And yeah, if you made it to the end of the video, comment
Thanks a lot
to let me know that you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.